Are you new to Genshin Impact, or simply find these complicated meta guides too confusing to truly grasp? Then I'm the guy you're looking for. Welcome to my Genshin For Dummies series, where I'll be breaking down every aspect of the game into a form newer players will, hopefully, have an easier time understanding. Today we start off with the 7 Elements for Dummies. Now, the core of Genshin's combat system and the characters that participate in said system are the 7 elements. These include, in no particular order, Pyro, Hydro, Electro, Cryo, Anemo, Geo, and Dendro. Each character in the game belongs to one of these 7 elements, with characteristics that usually, but not always, fall into their respective element's niche. A niche is sort of like a specialty, in that each element has its own unique role among the others, which gives it a distinct and unique feel in comparison to other elements. So, let's discuss each element in alphabetical order, because why not? You can think of Anemo as wind because that's exactly what it is. Wind magic, to a certain degree. And despite being the elements of freedom, it's the most oppressive element, as the wind pushes and blows stuff around, and the elements of Anemo does too. It specializes in what's called crowd control, which is using the wind to control crowds of enemies, usually by grouping them up or knocking them around. Essentially, Anemo is known for its ability to displace enemies on the battlefield into more advantageous positions for your team. In addition, Anemo possesses the unique ability to infuse itself with either Hydro, Electro, Pyro, or Cryo, allowing Anemo characters to deal damage from an element that they don't even belong to, so long as the element has already been applied to the opponent. So, the overview? Think of Anemo as Swirl. It swirls enemies around, usually, and also swirls other elements up too. Maybe I missed something, but I don't recall the Cryo Archon's ideal ever being directly stated outside of it previously being something related to love, but anyways, Cryo is the elements of ice, of course, and as such, does what you'd expect of ice. Under the right circumstances, it can freeze enemies, freeze water for exploration, it can put out fires and such, of course. It also has the unique ability to slow down opponents with Cryo on them, since moving when you're cold is much harder. Am I right? Cryo as an element is known for its pressure, through being able to freeze enemies and prevent them from not only moving, but also attacking back, allowing Cryo characters to usually exert high levels of pressure very comfortably. So the overview? Cryo makes things cold and slow, and if they're wet, they'll freeze, and you get to beat them up for free. Don't forget you can freeze water. Duh. Dendro can be thought of as plants and grass, and carries that vibe throughout its interactions within the game. It also happens to be the most complicated element in the game, so while this section will remain brief for the sake of the video, I will be making a Dendro for Dummies video to explain the elements in full detail. But, as Dendro's the elements of wisdom, it's rather befitting that you'd have to be wise enough to understand its many interactions to properly use it. It's a force to be reckoned with though, once you do understand it, and again, there's a video for that coming soon. So, the overview? It's a complicated element that wields destructive force when correctly and carefully used. Electro is my favorite element personally. I just love the purple aesthetic, and I think the concept of eternity is really cool, and I love Japanese culture, and by extension Inazuma, of course, and Raiden Shogun is my favorite character. Sorry. Guess you could say I could go on for an eternity about my love for Electro. Anyways, Electro is exactly what it sounds like. Lightning or electricity, and for the most part it behaves like it. You can electrocute enemies, and even yourself, if you're not careful, when Electro meets Hydro, and its characters are usually known for being fast and hitting multiple times pretty quickly. Think of it as death by 1,000 cuts, as opposed to a single devastating blow. This playstyle definitely has its merits nowadays, but that wasn't always the case, unfortunately. But that's a history lesson for another day. Electro is known for its role as a battery among the elemental roster, being the element that typically focuses on generating a lot of elemental particles to fund characters' elemental bursts. Overview: Electro is versatile in that it can do damage, it can support damage, it can act as a catalyst in specific reactions, a specific reaction, Hyperbloom, and its units usually generate a lot of energy for the team. Geo can be thought of as rocks and stone and stuff of that nature. It's currently the most neglected and underexplored element we have. However, that doesn't mean the element doesn't have its merits. As the elements of contracts, Geo thematically signed away its ability to do anything outside of a single, uniform reaction, but boy is it consistent. As the elements of rocks and stones and so on, Geo characters tend to either specialize in defensive support or are just naturally tanky as hell. As part of Geo's contract with Solidarity, the element works best when there are no other elements to react with, really, since it benefits most from other Geo characters being on the team. Albeit, this is only the case by circumstance considering the Geo lineup we currently have. I do believe the element was intended to work with the other elements a bit better, even if only originally, but that's neither here nor there. Overview: Geo units are sturdy bros that stick to themselves and do a pretty decent job in the process, even though the element does need, like, a massive buff. Navia, please, we're begging her to fix Geo. Hydro as an element definitely does the entire combat system justice simply by existing. It's involved in almost every single worthwhile reaction in this game and acts like the glue that holds the literal meta together. While my reaction for dummies guide is coming next, just know briefly that Hydro is involved in Vaporize, which is still Pyro's strongest and most consistent reaction for damage output, Freeze, which is the best reaction in the game when it works properly, Electro Charged, which single-handedly kept Electro on the map before Dendro, Bloom, which by itself is fine, but it leads to Hyperbloom and Burgeon, which are two of the strongest reactions in the game, and it's involved in Nilou Bountiful Bloom, which is one of the best teams in the game. The only good reactions that don't rely on Hydro is Catalyze, which might be better if you add some Hydro to make it, a Hyperbloom team anyways, and Melt, which is still pretty underexplored if we're not talking about the ancient Melt Ganyu team, and we do have Ridesley now, so there's that. Hydro is known pretty much for healing and mainly overall HP manipulation, as we've seen with Fontaine's releases. So the overview: just add water. Pyro can be thought of as fire, of course, and as the elements of war, it's known for its devastating damage output. Pyro units usually capitalize on the Vaporize reaction to dole out cataclysmic blows, in heavy contrast to Electro's death by 1,000 cuts motif, for example. It also burns stuff, specifically anything affected with Dendro, as of course, you can set plants and things of that nature on fire. But be careful, because you can get burned too, and it actually hurts really, really bad. We'll discuss Pyro's other reactions more in my upcoming Reactions for Dummies guide. Subscribe and stay tuned for that, of course. But overall, Pyro mainly focuses on damage. Not too much utility, just damage, usually. And that's a very, very brief introduction to all the 7 elements and their intended roles and functions. Of course, many details and honestly a whole breadth of information was omitted here for the sake of trying to keep things as simple and digestible as possible. So please let me know in the comments if it was too much or if there's room for improvement. But don't worry, I will cover everything I left out of this video in my next 2 videos, Reactions for Dummies and Dendro for Dummies, in that order. We'll have to discuss Dendro on its own through all of this, since it just lives in its own world, and half the reaction video would be Dendro anyway, so might as well give it its own video, right? So yeah, if you want to learn Genshin the easiest way possible, stay tuned. And if you're watching in the future, click on screen to watch my reaction guide next. Stay hydrated, and I'll see you guys next week.